today's video, I'm going to cover how to tie knocking points. There's two different versions that I'm going to show you in this video, a movable set and a permanent set. If you're new here, my name is Jay Kaminsky. I'm a two-time Olympic silver medalist in the sport of archery. Welcome to my channel. I'm making this channel a really great resource to all sorts of archery information. So hit that subscription button and the notification bell so that way you're notified when a new video is uploaded. And I've also noticed about half of my viewers are also unsubscribed as well. So if you hit that subscription button, you'd really help this channel out. You're watching the Jay Kaminsky YouTube channel. Anyway, I'm going to get into showing you how to tie knocking points on your recurve bow. This will work for compound, barebow, traditional, doesn't matter. I really suggest avoiding those brass knocking points. They can really tear up your tab face a whole lot. So seeing how I decided that I'm going to start shooting barebow, I might as well use the bow that I'm going to be shooting. So I might as well take that opportunity to tie on a new set of knocking points and show you at home how to tie knocking points that are professional and will not fall off if you follow these steps correctly. So obviously we need to talk about supplies and what you're going to need to actually do this job. So I'm going to go through and show you those now. Everything here that I am recommending you can find in a link below in the description. It's going to be an Amazon affiliate link, so that means if you click on those links and purchase these products that I'm recommending, you'll help this channel out. And even if you'd click on the link and just do your normal Amazon shopping as well, I do get credit for some of those sales. So you really help me out if you do click on those links and check out what I've got to offer for you guys. You definitely need a bow square to start with. I prefer an L square. A T square works just fine. The ones with the sharper edges really help, and you'll see why in a little bit, because not only are we using this to actually measure where the knocking point will be as well as our brace height, but also we're going to be using this as a tool to make the permanent knocking points. And the next thing you need is definitely some sort of a knife, a razor blade, something like that. A lighter also is helpful, especially when you're finishing the actual knocking points and you need to burnish the ends so they don't pull through the actual knot itself. You may need some Allen wrenches to adjust your tiller, because we're going to have to set our tiller exactly where we would like it to start before we tie on our knocking points, because tiller affects where our knocks need to be. And lastly, we absolutely need some knock tying thread. I never recommend to use the same serving that your center serving is made out of, especially when you're using something like a halo from BCY, because it's so slick and slippery that when you tie two slippery things on top of each other, they just don't want to stay put. Your chances are you're going to have a higher likelihood of having your knocking point slip on your string if you're not using a different serving. So my favorite serving to use to tie knocking points on is something called 3D. It's from BCY. I will put a link in the description below on where you can find it, of course. This is my favorite one because it's not too soft. It definitely is quite rigid as far as how much it wants to actually crush, but it's very thin. So the thinner it is, the better. The less bulky they are, the less damage they do to your finger tabs, the less wear you have on that, the faster they are in theory, because they kind of just become part of the string. So like I said, I recommend 3D. Do not buy the knock tying thread from BCY. It is more than double the size of this as far as the actual individual strand diameter, and they just get so big and bulky, especially when you're tying the movable type. So it's really just a headache. This is definitely the way to go. And also, I forgot to mention, you'll need a bottle of either fletching glue or superglue and some computer paper as well. What we need to do first with our actual bow is we need to make sure our brace height is relatively close. I've already had a video uploaded that I talked about how to set your brace height and how to measure your brace height. So if you haven't seen that, I'll put a card at the top. There'll also be a link in the description below. But with this particular setup that I have, it's a 25-inch riser with long limbs. I'm going to run it somewhere in the neighborhood of 22.5 centimeters, which is roughly, it's about 8 7/8, give or take. So I'm a little shy of it. So I'm going to add some twists to my string and bring that brace height up just a little bit. That's kind of where my brace height like to be for my individual preferences. You know, everybody's a little bit different. Everybody's bow's a little bit different. And I'm sure once I really get into this a whole lot more, I will play with my brace height much more than this, so that way I know where it needs to be. After I string my bow, I need to give it a little pluck just to make sure the limbs are in place. And then I will recheck my brace height. And I'm pretty much right where I want to be. Maybe a little high. That's all right. Not really important. But that's okay because brace height doesn't really affect your nocking point all that much. Especially for me, I'm just putting this nocking point on to get me close and get me started, so that way I can get out there and start shooting some arrows with my barebow. Next to check is your tiller. A typical recurve setup, at a typical Olympic recurve setup with split finger, meaning you shoot with one finger above and two below the arrow, you want to have the lower, the bottom tiller a little bit shorter than the top. So anywhere from 1/8 to 1/4 is a really good starting point. But because I'm shooting barebow, I've talked to some people and they recommend starting with an even tiller. So right now I am about 3/16 of an inch shorter on the bottom. So what I am going to do is I'm going to adjust that. So it looks like I can back the bottom limb bolt out a little bit. Now you should normally unstring your bow while you're adjusting your limb bolts, but because my tiller is so close, I really don't have to move it a whole lot. And as you can tell, the bow is really not upset by moving it without unstringing it. If I was adjusting my bow weight, I probably would unstring the bow itself. But like I said, I've moved it less than a half a turn for this adjustment, and it's really not going to hurt the riser in just a small increment of adjustment. So now my tiller is evenly split, and now I need to make sure my rest is in the correct location. So I'm going to grab an arrow that I'm going to be shooting out of this bow, and I'm going to make sure that the rest is set up so it will hold the arrow about in the center of the plunger. That's just a decent starting point. So I've got a little bit of adjustment to make here to make that happen. So my rest is now set up close enough for me to actually measure and start the nocking point. As you can see, I have actually 3 individual nocking points tied on for whatever reason. I think I might have been just showing somebody how to tie nocking points on this string. Not exactly sure. I'm sure this nocking point that it is on right now is probably going to be very close, but I'm going to cut these off and then we're going to start over from the beginning. So when you're cutting your nocking points off, you have to be absolutely very careful to not cut yourself, obviously, but not to cut your center serving at all. So you don't want to come in at a steep angle to the nocking points to try to cut it. You want to try to like shave it off basically. Okay, so now that you can see that I'm sitting in a chair and I have a stabilizer on because it helps hold the bow in a nice position to actually work from. And you want to start with the sight window side up. I'm going to first take my bow square and I'm going to click it on the string all the way against the string, and then I'm going to slide it down until the actual square is just clearing the arrow rest. As you can see, it's just clearing it most of the time. So that's perfect. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you first how to tie the movable nocking points. So again, here's my BCY 3D. As you can see, it's quite old. I've had it for a very long time. And you just pull like, I don't know, maybe a 50 centimeter or 18-inch piece off, give or take. Cut a chunk of it off, set it down, and then you're going to, this is why I prefer the L square, is because I can just come in from the top. I don't have to worry about pushing my serving through 2 clips. I can just freely come from the top like this. You want to find the center of the string itself, and you're going to start with just basic granny knots, basic overhand knots. And we're going to start with just a single overhand to begin with. And my goal is I want it to be a 1/2 inch above center, give or take. So if you look at this graduation here, you can see it's graduated from 0 up. So I'm talking about the nocking point, the bottom. Actually, I'm going to set my top knock at a 1/2 inch. So my first knot is going to be at a 1/2 inch. So that means that my knock itself will be sitting like this right here. So the top is going to start where we're going to be tying from. You always start from the knock and move away from the knock as you're tying the nocking points. When you do it that way, it really helps keep the nocking point clean against the arrow. So I started with my top knock, and I have one regular granny knot or one single overhand knot, and the knot is on this side of the string. So I pull that snug and quite tight, and then now I tie a knot on the other side, so down below. But I'm not going to do just a single overhand knot, I'm going to do a double. So I do 1 loop and then 2 loops, and then I tie the knot so it tightens right against where the first one was, but on the opposite side. I cinch that down, I come to the other side again. Now I'm tying a knot on the top side, and I do a 1, 2, so a double overhand knot, or like a double granny knot. And again, you can see as I'm tightening it, it tightens right against where the other one was, the first single one. Now I'm going to continue doing this and do doubles on either side of the string and work my way up away from where the knock actually is going to sit. And I'm going to do, I don't know, maybe 6 or so on each side. However many you do on the top knock, you should do on the bottom. I suggest doing it so that the length of it this way is longer than the diameter of it this way. So that way it won't want to move unless you're actually moving it. Okay, so now you can see that it is longer than the diameter. So I'm good to go. My last knot was a double on the bottom side, so I'm going to do a single on the top, like this, and then I'm going to tie another single on top of it without going to the other side. And what that's going to do is it's going to end the knock itself, and it's not going to untie. I cut off the extra, but I leave about 1/8 of an inch, maybe 2 millimeters, give or take, that I'm going to burn. So you can see that I'm leaving a little bit of extra. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a lighter and I'm going to burnish those ends. So I suggest to wet your finger or your thumb, because as it is on fire or hot or liquid, you're going to quench it really quick. You're going to smush it into the knot so that way it really extra secures it. So I lick my thumb just because it's easy. I start melting the one side, and then I quench it with my thumb like that. You don't really have to wet it. It's just up to you. So again, I'm going to melt this one a little bit and quench it. So now you can see that it is melted and stuck together, and our knocking point is done. Also, I forgot to mention about this movable knocking point. Why did I do a double granny knot on top and a double granny knot on bottom? That's because 4 knots is enough to make a full circle around the string. So that way there's not a loose strand in this knot. There is just knots completely encompassing the entire string, so it keeps it nice and tight, but it's not too loose and unwieldy and want to come undone. This keeps it nice and organized. If we wanted 2 knocking points, which I always suggest you do, but I'm not going to show you the bottom one because it's the same as the top. I just start in the center where the knock is and then move downwards. I would use this type of knocking point when I am tuning and I have no idea where my knocking point needs to be, because I can move them and twist them up and down the serving like a nut on a bolt. So I should be able to take this knocking point, and here's a good reference. There's a nice dark line right there. And I'm going to try twisting it down the string and see if it'll move. And always the first time to get it going is always a little difficult because it's really bound in there, but watch, I'm going to spin this probably 5-6 rotations, and it's going to move down the string quite a lot. So as you can see, I'm closer. Keep going, and it's moving down, right? So now I can do the opposite and move it back up. So now I should be right about at that 1/2 inch where I wanted it to be. So I'm right where I want to be. Now, if I wanted to make this semi-permanent, I would coat it in Superglue, so that way the knocking point itself would want to become part of the string. So I'm going to show you now how to tie permanent knocking points, and I'm going to tie the bottom one first, seeing how this is locating our knock already, and then I'm going to retie this one to make it permanent as well. Now, to make permanent knocking points, you need the same amount of serving, maybe a little bit longer. If you're new with it, start with about 2 feet, 60 centimeters of thread. That way you can have a lot to work with. And you're going to want to actually start not where the knock is on the string, or not in its final place where you want it to be on the string. So that means at this knock, on this knock, if I were to want to finish it, my serving should be right here, right? So without the knock on there, you can see it's got a little bit of a gap there. But with this permanent knocking point, after we finish tying it, we will be taking the bow square and smushing it down away from the knock to make a really solid foundation for the knock to sit against, and that way the serving or the knocking point that you're tying on will not be squishing as you're shooting arrow after arrow after arrow, so your knocking point won't be moving up and down. We are basically going to be eliminating any and all ability of movement after we finish tying the knocking point. So as I tie 1/2 granny knot on the top side, not where I want it to end up, this is where I would want it to end up. I'm going to tie it above that, so there would be no room for the knock to actually click on the string. So I cinch that down, tie it and pull it tight, and then I'm going to tie a single knot on the other side. Now, as I show you after I tie this, how I move these, you're going to see how where this first knot gets tied is going to depend on how much you can squish your actual knocking points. So it will depend on your ability to tight and keep these strings tight as you're wrapping them, as well as how densely spaced they are as you're wrapping them. The looser you tie it, the looser you stack them, the less you'll, or the more you're going to have to squish it down to take up those spaces. But the tighter you do it, the less it's going to squish. And now you can see this side wants to naturally rotate around and be nice and neat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this one down and hold it down there. And then I'm going to wrap this as a serving and hold the tension with this finger as I'm wrapping down. Now, as far as how many times to wrap down, that's 2, this is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I always start with 8. I move this out of the way and I do another 4. I actually do 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I'm going to back serve. So I've been rotating up and over the top. So now I'm going to hold this here, and I'm going to take this thread, and you need a lot of extra, and I'm going to loop it over the top, but then I'm going to wrap on the inside of the loop itself. So I'm going to do 1 loop, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you make sure your serving is right where the other side was. And you pull this one on top of it here, up inside the loop, and then you keep tension on this side, and you loop over the top, and you should have 5 loops. And that 5th loop you hold, and now you take this tail and you pull through what you've got left. And you want to keep tension on it because it's going to keep the knocking point nice and tidy. And then once it gets tight, you pull it tight, you cut off the excess, leave about 1/8 of an inch, and then we're going to burn that as well on both of these pigtails. So I burn this one down, that one down. Okay, so now this bottom knocking point is basically done. Now we need to take our bow square and smush it down so the knock will fit in. So you need to be careful because when you slip off, you can really whack your thumb and it definitely can hurt, especially if you have longer nails. You can bend the nail backwards. Been there, done that. Don't want to do it again. So you'll see that I'm kind of squishing this knocking point down. There's no science to it. I'm just trying to smush it down, and once it stops moving, then I'm going to check where my knock fit is. So that's about it as far as how much it can move. I'm going to test fit a knock on here. And you'll see I can still rotate the string, but I have no vertical movement up and down. Actually, I have just a tiny, tiny bit of play. So that's close enough for me. I like having a tight fit knock, not squishing it, but just supporting it so you can't have any vertical movement. If you have any vertical movement, I think it's going to be inconsistent in where the knock is sitting on the string. Therefore, your sight's going to be changing or your groups are not going to be consistent. So now that I have this bottom knocking point on, I can cut this top one off, and I'm going to tie a permanent one on the top, just like this one, but opposite. Start from the middle and work my way out, but still serving over the top. Now there is another way to do this. You can take the serving itself and use a bit of hot melt that you put points in with and drag it across the hot melt to actually get these a little sticky, and then you can use the lighter to melt that stickiness so it becomes part of the string. I personally don't like doing that. I like the super glue method, which I'll show you at the end of this video. All right, so I've got the top knocking point off now, and I'm going to get another large length of serving, cut it off. Now I'm going to start not where the knock is. Remember, I needed to start towards the center more. Pull it tight, do the half knot on the other side. Now I'm going to be wrapping up over the top, so I'm going to lay this side down, and I'm going to wrap the same amount of times. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, just like I did on the other side. Move this out of the way, do 5 more. 1, 5, back serve. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Put the pigtail up, hold it tight. Hold it, pull it through. Cut it off. Melt it. Squish it. And once it won't move anymore, I will check and see how my knock fits. Hopefully, it'll be nice and supported. So it clicks on. I have a little bit of movement up and down, which is not what I want. It's loose in some areas, tight in some areas. So what I did is I didn't tie this first knot down low enough, because when I moved it and crushed it up this direction, it moved to the point, it moved too far. So ideally, what I should do is retie this one and tie that first knot a little bit further down, or wrap this one a bit tighter to prevent it from squishing so much. So that way it's fully supporting the knock. Okay, and the last step to this is using super glue to finish this off. So as you can see, I have an old bottle of Fletch glue. You want a regular piece of computer paper, put it down on your lap because this might drip on you. And you're going to take super glue and you're going to coat the actual string itself where all the knots are. This one's almost cured, so it's very sticky and gooey. So this one's kind of perfect for this, so that way you don't get dripped on your pants. And you just want to coat the actual knots and coat the center, and then just above and below the ends of the knocking points themselves. Then you take your string and a piece of paper and you wipe it like this to clean off most of it and spread it around evenly. You fold it in half, get inside of the actual spot itself where the knocking point's supposed to be clear for the knock, and then take a sacrificial knock and you want to click it on the string and rotate the string like this and get it off quickly so it doesn't glue down. And then you just let it sit and fully cure, and you will have a nice evenly coated knocking point with super glue that will help protect the knocking points. It'll help keep them permanent, and by clicking the knock on and off like we just did, now we have a really nice solid area in the center that our knock is going to be supported by. So it's very flat, very round and consistent. All right, so that covers my knocking point. As you can see, I now have a permanent knocking point. This is going to be the first knocking point area that I'll be set up for my barebow. I'd like to take a moment to thank my Patreon supporters and remind everybody else out there that you can access these videos earlier once you become a patron of mine. For information on that, I will put a link below, as well as I'll put a card up top over here for you to click on in case you want to become a Patreon supporter. There's many benefits, including early access to videos, exclusive chats, coaching benefits, free apparel, discounts to apparel, and a whole lot more. So if you're interested in that, like I said, I'd appreciate you checking that out. Thanks for watching, and thank you to my Patreon supporters. If you want to become a Patreon supporter or check out books, apparel, and some seminar info, head to jkaminski.com, and be sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to be notified every time a new video is uploaded. And I appreciate you watching. Thank you again.